So I started out doing in 2011 research on Du Bois and exhibition of American Negroes, and his research in infographics detailing the middle class kind of economic status of African Americans at that time. Um, there's portraits that went along with the exhibition that I've been working with for the past 9 years. So that got me researching Reconstruction and American history, and I came across this instance of activism and protest by these washerwomen. They went on strike against the city of Atlanta in 1881, and they wanted higher wages and better working conditions. So as I researched these women, the idea of collective agency, organization, labor rights, and local policies and legislation and politicians and how they influence the labor force, and how the labor force had to kind of push back against those entities for higher pay and respect and decency. So the idea of the collective has been swirling around my head a lot, and group agency, especially a lot of things that went on over the summer. It just kind of made become more palatable that organizing and campaigning and finding strength in numbers to combat whatever ills a person is going through economically or occupationally or personally. And the show Vis Arts is an articulation of all of that, but it's also a container for my own feelings and how I kind of branched out of, I went through the transition of being in my head and being very concerned about the virus, but also finding a community online through online platforms. So I was more on the computer, but also being more socially engaged or aware of what's going on. The show has all of these ideas kind of swirling around. So there's a video in which I appropriate this protest scene from The Standard, a movie, which came out in 2008, I think. But it's about a South African police officer that turned into the most accomplished bank robber in the country. And it's wrapped around apartheid. So there's a protest scene in the middle that I want to sample and appropriate and remake the imagery and put it back into a video. Horns or vuvuzelas, which is a South African horn that's used at football games. And it sounds like a bunch of bees. When you go to a stadium, you hear all these people blowing these plastic horns. So that linked to my idea of the collective and the energy and power around that. Then I'm working on portraits, vertical portraits of women as well. Some of them from the Washerwomen era and situation, others from the Du Bois exhibition so I'm thinking about these portraits of these women and think about multiples, which is a big shift from, or one shift from the usual work I do, which is standalone portraits, and putting video into that and making these plastic horns out of transferred paper. So there's splotches of color that are just rolled up into horns and having those tile the wall. And that's going back to, the vuvuzelas and the collective sound and energy, but also Twitch as well. That's one of the bits that people use to cheer and so forth. So I'm kind of linking it back to the social media platform also. The humanity in labor and resistance, especially when it comes to American history and Black history too. A lot of the stereotypes towards African Americans that were deemed insufficient as far as like labor, so being lazy and unintelligent and all these other things, turned out, the more I researched American history, were just forms of resistance. For instance, when the slaves chose not to work, or they were arrested, or they find ways to get out of work, that in itself was a form of resistance. It was articulated as being lazy, but at the same time, if you work for free and your whole life is preoccupied by the means of other people to give you resources, housing, and food, you find in these strategies you need to find your time for yourself. or to control your own time or control your own body. The same thing with these washerwomen. I just enthralled by ordinary people who had the gall to organize a campaign and to go and get systems that felt much more towering and powerful than they were. So I'm very much interested in ordinary people that have a sense of mystery and allure, and in large part because they were ill written about in history. So that the activity of doing the research and discovery is all these things that interest me and influence me to research all these people. So the Vis Arts show is really a combination of all these things. And I'm focused on three main bodies of work to kind of keep myself focused and centered, but at the same time, there's a lot still unresolved. And the trick is trying to figure out how to capitalize on these unresolved feelings and experiences, but make work that is yet still poignant and elaborately done. I strive to have as many layers as it's reasonable within the work, either in the physical pieces themselves, and that's where I am now with the collages. I'm starting to make them thicker and have multiple layers of medium. But also, this goes back to the way I think about the content and idea as well. For me, it has to be a symbiotic relationship between the idea and the piece and the physical. So I think very layered regarding the content too. Being aware of myself in the time I'm in, what's going on in current events and locally and nationally, internationally, but also paying attention to history and seeing the dots back and forth to connect. And the goal is trying to be informed as I can, specific as I can within myself and within the reference material that I use to make my images too. So it's been very interesting looking at American history through the experiences of Black women in particular, because that's one spot I had a deficit in as well. So not only am I looking at American history, looking at it through Black women as well, and add all those layers on top of that too. So yeah, there is a certain capacity to handle a lot of ideas